Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this virtual UN NGO Pathway Forum. I am Ashley Ferraro, and I am the Assistant Director for the Office of Global Learning at FDU. Before we get started, I just want to remind everyone to, if you are joining this forum, to please, if you're participating, to please put your Zoom meetings on mute so we do not have any disturbances during the forum. Afterward, the actual forum itself will be about an hour, and then afterward there will be a Q&A section to ask some questions. And during that time, I will ask if you can please ask your questions using the Zoom group chat, and we will take turns answering them so we are able to get your questions answered. Today I have the honor of welcoming our forum speakers. They are Mr. Rogel Nuguid. He is the Director of Strategic Alliance at Global CEO Alliance. He has a proven network of institutional development partners within and external to the UN. Mr. Nuguid has 25 years of extensive experience in international relations, operations, human resources, grants and contract administration, financial monitoring, budgeting management, project management, and much more. He also holds a master's degree in management, leadership, and administration, and diplomas of certifications in human development, human resources. And he is also a FDU adjunct professor teaching global issues and cross-cultural perspectives. Our other speaker today is Miss Laurie Phipps. She was one of the principal policy advisors of the United States mission to the UN on international social issues, including women's rights, public health, and indigenous peoples' rights prior to her retirement in September 2018. And while at the US mission, Phipps negotiated on behalf of the US policy positions with their nation's representations in the multilateral settings of the United Nations. And today, I would also like to introduce who will be moderating the panel, Dr. Maya Senyal, who is the Career Development Specialist for the Metropolitan Campus Career Development Office. So now I would like to hand over the forum to Maya to begin the panel.
All right, thank you, Ashley. Welcome, Laurie and Rogel. Thank you so much for making the time. We're gonna have a moderated panel Q&A for about an hour, and then we'll open up the question panel to students as well towards the very end. So I'm going to start with you, Laurie, and then Rogel. In a nutshell, now that the students have heard a little bit about your bios, what are two things that you do on a daily basis that are your priority work jobs?
So when I was an advisor to the American ambassador at the UN, I had two basic functions, two categories of functions really. One was outward facing and one was inward facing. So the outward facing function that I had was to negotiate with other countries. And I negotiated on Security Council resolutions, General Assembly resolutions, UN declarations, UN agreed conclusions at the Commission on the Status of Women. And so I would receive instructions from Washington and would then go into the UN building, sit down with my colleagues from Russia, from China, from Egypt, from the European Union, from all the countries of the world, and then we would hash out exactly what we wanted the UN document on that subject to say. Some people shared US positions and priorities, some people opposed US positions and priorities, and that outward facing function was for me to try to get the US point of view across to the rest of the countries and come up with a document that the US could stand behind and support. the other side of what I did was more of an inward-facing function to report back to Washington and up my chain of command to the American ambassador and let Washington and my ambassador know what my policy recommendations were, where I thought the US ought to be going in terms of our policy position vis-a-vis the issues that I was working on, and what sort of problems I was encountering in trying to convince the other countries of the world to support us in those positions.
Rogel?
Yeah, thank you, Maya. With my work with the United Nations, I did two key functions. So the first one, as chief of staff, I pretty much report to the back then called the Associate or Assistant Secretary General and envoy of the UN Secretary General on South-South cooperation. Pretty much as chief of staff, you are to handle all the communications in regards to the issue on international cooperation that complements both North-South to South-South to triangular cooperation. So that entails a lot of policy coordination, a lot of policy negotiation with member states, including the US permanent mission or US mission. And it also requires a lot of coordination and oversight management in regards to budget, human resources, program funding, grants management, and whatnot. And secondly, on top of being a chief of staff, I do the UN interagency coordination, in which I organize an annual event, which is called the Global Development Expo, where you are to engage 190 plus member states alongside with the private sector, the think tanks, the NGOs and IGOs. All of this, we showcase development solutions that come from the developing countries, especially from the global south, and we showcase it every year and then share it to both developed and developing countries for replication. So pretty much those are the things that I do almost on a regular basis.
Okay, thank you. So as a follow-up to that, since we have students who are as early as their first years or second years and all the way to upperclassmen, Laurie, let's start with, in the range of your main responsibilities, what are 3 key skills that you have used consistently that you would want to tell students about?
One very important skill is to be able to write succinctly and to the point. And in order to write well, you also have to listen well, at least in the job that I did, because much of what I did in terms of reporting back to Washington would be to go to UN meetings and listen to either panel discussions and lecturers, or listen to what the other countries were saying when we were negotiating, and then be able to distill a 3-hour meeting into a digestible piece of writing. Most people in Washington, higher up people, they don't want to read 7 pages of explanation of what people said in 3 hours. You need to be able to listen and say, okay, in those 3 hours, these were the 4 salient points. These were the people who were making those points. This is where the problem is. This is where the decision-making point is. And in a page or page and a half, be able to wrap up 3 hours of people saying disparate things and get to the point, distill it down into the nitty-gritty, and then have a clear action forcing question at the end, a decision point. So being able to listen, distill the ideas, and then write well was a very important skill for me and for all of my colleagues. And whenever we had interns, if they didn't write well, their chance of getting accepted in an internship was nil. We would, at one point, I was one of the people screening the intern applications. If people didn't write well, if their thoughts didn't hang together, if they had grammatical mistakes, even if it was like just a sloppy, didn't use your spell check, that pretty much automatically disqualified people. If they couldn't even bother to proofread their job application essay, then we figured they wouldn't bother to proofread what they were writing as a work project, and we put their application at the bottom of the pile. Another skill was be able to argue persuasively and to be able to articulate the policy positions. And another skill was being able to work well with a team and get along with people, understand people's point of view, empathize with people's point of view, work collaboratively with your colleagues, and work as collaboratively as possible with your negotiating partners.
So let me see if I listened well enough. The 4 skills you mentioned were, and this is my teacher personality students, when you're listening, take notes, because in the real life, we'll often ask you to refer back to them. So you said writing, listening, persuasive capacity, and teamwork.
Yes.
Good, thank you. And Rogel, what are the 3 or 4 top skills you use and have used in your work on a daily basis?
At the United Nations, you have what you call the competency-based interviews. And therefore, students, though they are fresh graduates, they are measured based on the past experience and how they did go about it, leading to a solution of something. So every time someone is interested of pursuing a career at the UN, they need to go back to all the experience they had, whether it's a work related or family related or personal experience related, because all of that will contribute and build up to a particular competence. And therefore, in terms of competency-based assessment, we look at 2 things. One is the soft skills, and the other one is the hard skills. So if you look at the soft skills, I am with Laurie in terms of UN looking at teamwork as one critical competency or skill that is a must. You cannot be working in silos in the UN. You have to partner, network, and be part of big community. And so to me, teamwork is very critical. Part of soft skill as well is a positive attitude. People who have a very positive attitude and looking at the client needs, you are able to respond quickly and pretty much saving a lot of resources if you are looking at the needs of your clients. So the very moment you are sensitive to the needs of your clients as part of being positive into responding to their needs, that is one measurable skill as well. Another one is creativity and inclination to provide solutions. So those individuals who are solution oriented, those have they could quickly gain weight. The very moment they are able to articulate what have they done in the past and how they managed to articulate it in the interview, that would be a good one. In terms of hard skills, of course, it's so critical that everyone should be very good in IT. All the software operation of the Microsoft, database management, project management, anything that has something to do with IT. You have to show that you have the strength for that, especially on database management, project management, and whatnot. So those to me are very critical in terms of the skills needed.
All right, so to summarize, teamwork, positivity, creativity, and technological skills.
Right.
Good. Thank you so much. So in terms of the positivity, because of the environment at this moment, I would like to have both of you discuss a little bit more. Along your pathways to your careers, when have you experienced challenges and what kind of steps did you take to ensure that you stayed in a positive, productive mindset? And I'm asking this so that students can get a sense of how challenges are invariable in all times and all fields and how successful people overcome that. So Rogel, would you go first this time?
Yeah, sure. In terms of scale, it's not similar to the scale that we have right now. But in the early 20s, there was an experience of tsunami in Sri Lanka and some portion of Asia that pretty much created a destruction in vast communities of both Sri Lanka and another country, I forgot. There is a strong, I think, the commitment to respond to the needs of our clients at the local and regional level led us to one singular vision to helping. We actually just, I think the focus of everyone in terms of helping and the commitment to pretty much execute all of the things that we need to respond to in regards to their basic needs while they are suffering, the people suffering as a result of the tsunami. From the global, regional, and local level, we only have one vision, and that is to respond to the basic needs. I think it is not at the level we are in right now, but it's something that is so real back then when Thailand and Sri Lanka were suffering because of the tsunami effect. A lot of people died. A lot of houses were destroyed. It took a long while before all these countries and these communities were able to build up from the devastation of the tsunami. And so going back to your question, it's like it's always a common vision that led us to the positive effect. There's no, how do you call it, destruction. The leadership was so critical. We followed the leader, and that particular vision pretty much scaled down to the rest of the team.
So there was this sense that we are all in this together.
That is correct.
And one for all for one concept.
Yeah.
Thank you. And Laurie, positivity from your end.
Okay, well, in terms of trying to find a positive solution to a challenge, I want to bring it down to more of a personnel kind of level. When I was relatively early on in my career with the U.S. mission, I had 2 children. I got pregnant twice. I had 2 babies. It became difficult to spend time with my children, because when you're at the beginning stages of your career, and in some careers throughout your career, your time schedule is not your own. I couldn't decide when I wanted to leave work, when I wanted to get to work. I had to be in meetings when my ambassador told me she needed me there or he needed me there to be the note taker or to be the person in charge. So if there was a meeting at 9 in the morning that I had to be at, I had to be there. If I had to be at a meeting that my ambassador was having with some person from private industry at 6 o'clock at night, I had to go to the meeting at 6 o'clock at night. So I found that with 2 babies 18 months apart, it was difficult to get home in time to put them to bed. And sometimes I would get home after they, had to be put to bed and they were sleeping. And I found I had very little time with my children. And so I wanted a more positive interaction with my family, with my babies. And so I sought a transfer. At that point in the beginning of my career, I was working on Security Council issues. And Security Council in the UN is the part of the international organization that gets the most press, that gets the most attention. It's the sexiest part. It's the part that is held to be most important by the policymakers in Washington. And so there was a lot of pressure to be constantly turning out memos, going to meetings, working longer hours on the Security Council issues. And so I asked for a transfer to the Economic and Social Council section, where there wasn't quite so much of a constant train of meetings, so that I'd be able to get home once in a while and see my babies before they had to go to sleep. So that was a real trade-off for me in my career.
So if I may summarize briefly, positivity is in a large scale, when there's issues, banding together and following leadership. And positivity is also making decisions on a more individual level to have commitment to the work and to be able to say, okay, how do I do my work best? In what context, in what situation? And having the adaptability and flexibility to make those decisions. I'm trying to think of something you said, Laurie, that I wanted to pick up on, but now I've spaced out because I'm not taking notes, which is very rare for me. But I did want to ask for both of you, Laurie, you first, what was the kind of work you did before you decided to go into the UN?
Before I went to the UN, I was a Foreign Service officer with the Department of State in Washington. And I took the Foreign Service exam, became a Foreign Service officer, was posted in London, England, was posted in Canada, in Calgary, Canada, was posted in Washington. And then again, another personal family trade-off, I got married and put in my resignation to the Foreign Service because I married a man who didn't want to go traveling abroad and living overseas. But I also let the personnel department at the Department of State know that I was going to be living in New York. And so a few months after I resigned and moved to New York and got married, they asked me if I wanted to work for the U.S. ambassador at the U.S. mission. And so I was doing very similar work. It was easy for me to get that job because I had all the skills of a Foreign Service officer, having done that for several years. Before that, I was in grad school. And before I went to college, actually, I took a few years off between high school and college, and I worked as a secretary because without a college education, that's pretty much all that I could do. And they had secretaries back then. You don't even need secretaries these days. So that's what I did, worked as a secretary, then went to college, went to graduate school, went into the Foreign Service, and from there went to the U.S. mission, to the UN.
Nice trajectory. And Rogel?
I started my career as a clinical psychologist. My first master's was in counseling psychology. And then from there, I moved into corporate. I worked for the Ericsson Telecommunications as an organizational development specialist, a senior HR manager. And then after that, I worked with the former president of the Philippines, Fidel Ramos, for their peacekeeping process. And then after that, I got an offer from the UN immediately after to work for initially as an executive officer and then eventually as chief of staff.
So in the career services in particular, we talk to students a lot about storytelling and explaining how they have developed their skills. So following the trajectory of each of your careers, and Rogel, if you would like to start first, what's one skill you have acquired at each of these roles that are different from the skills that you've already mentioned? So we want to kind of set up the string, and show students that this is always a process.
Right. First things first, I never dreamed of working for the UN. It was never a plan to work for the United Nations. Right. So when I started my career as a clinical psychologist, the intent was to help people, especially the battered women. And so the set of skill that was needed back then was one, the listening skill, the compassion to help. And so the listening is a very, I think, baseline competency that moved from one career to the next, that moved me effectively because it is something that is needed. You cannot be effective, you cannot be successful if you pretty much have a wrong set of communication hearing skill. So the listening comes with the context of how you understand where you're from and what are you doing at the current phase and what would be the expectation in the future. And so the listening is one. When I moved into OD, organizational development, and it's in a private sector setting, things change in terms of requirements. There is a demand for you to be professional. There is a demand for you to communicate effectively. There is a demand that you have to be persuasive, effective in the negotiation, and of course, again, going back to the listening skill. So the premise of expanding your competencies pretty much will be stretched if you work for the private sector, because in there, time, speed is of a requirement. Every single time, every single effort that you do is always equated to money. So that in itself would give you a very good discipline, actually, on how you systematize your professionalism. And that had helped me actually eventually when I became one of the advisors of the former President Ramos, because the professionalism that you have to exude in dealing with various partners. And if you talk about peacekeeping as a key to success of the presidency, then professionalism would definitely play a role. And again, going back to professionalism, you have to pretty much exude the respect that your work commands. You would have to value partnership because it's critical that everything will have to be considered when you talk about peacekeeping. And of course, the issue of you have to command that you are knowledgeable of something, so that in the end, the respect will be given to you. And then eventually, I became part of the United Nations. And in the United Nations, I think the three major values would be professionalism, respect, and I forgot the other one, but the universal value is there. You need to give respect, you need to show respect so that in the end you gain it. The professionalism is there. The indicators of being professional would be nonstop thirst for learning. You have to certify yourself, you have to gain knowledge. I had 3 masters because of that demand. You have to acquire languages beyond what you have already learned. So you have 6 languages in the UN that pretty much falls under that professionalism, because you have to understand that these 6 languages are critical to the geopolitical negotiation in which Laurie knows so much. So all of this is a building block of things and would prepare you. And at the end of the day, would show that it's your strength. It's like an integrated strength out of these experiences that you've gone through the years, pretty much engulf you with all this necessary competency and become you, as become a natural you in dealing with work like the United Nations.
So to summarize, there's listening skills, active listening. There is learning how to be really professional. There is a lifelong thirst for knowledge and wanting to learn and grow in the field, so that in the end you can become this authentic whole person that does this work.
Yeah.
Okay.
And respect.
And respect, yes. Thank you. I'm really trying to listen here and not take notes, which is very rare for me. Like I said, so I'm like, okay, listening mode on.
That's right.
And Laurie, along the trajectory of your grad school to, well, work to grad school to careers, what are some of the key transferable skills you would tell students to focus on?
So I want to pick up on what Rogel was saying about professionalism. And through the course of my career, I found that I could really learn a lot from the people that I've worked with, and especially the people that I worked under. So in the Foreign Service, the way that the career trajectory works is that every 3 years, between 2 and 4 years, usually 3 years, people get transferred. So the work that I was doing, both in Washington and in New York at the mission to the UN, was very much integrated with the work of Foreign Service officers. So every boss that I had, whether it was an office director or an ambassador, would turn over every 3 years or so. sometimes more often, especially in the case of ambassadors to the UN, where a new incoming president would replace the ambassador with someone from his own team. And every ambassador and every office director had their own way of showing respect to their staff and to the people that they were interacting with, and had different methods of dealing with their high-level counterparts. And I had the advantage, the privilege of sitting in with some very high-level people, sitting in with Madeleine Albright, sitting in with Susan Rice, sitting in with Thomas Pickering, sitting in with various very experienced and distinguished diplomats, and seeing how they did the work of diplomacy. And from each boss that I had throughout the chain of assignments that I had, I picked up different skills, and they all, to some extent, were mentors to me by helping me refine my skill set at how to be a more persuasive, more effective diplomat. And then, as Rogel also said, each time that I had a new subject matter that I had to deal with, then I gained substantive knowledge, so that I knew what I was talking about, not just on one issue, but on a range of issues.
So again, the lifelong learning, thirst for knowledge, wanting to continue to grow, and knowing that that is part of the deal is key.
And seeking mentors.
And seeking mentors, which brings me to my next question. So this is a perfect segue. As students are looking to gain entry as interns or young full-time professionals, in terms of each of your own mentoring style, what would you say are a couple of strategies they should implement early on so that they can be successful in getting and succeeding in internships and new positions? As mentors, what are things you would advise them to do? Laurie, you can go.
It's difficult to be an intern, I think, because very often, at least in my experience with the offices that I've worked in, we take on interns. We don't always have a very clear idea of what exactly we want to have the interns do.
Yes.
And so it may be a little frustrating for interns that there's not clear direction right from day one. But when an intern proves themselves to be capable and shows that they're willing to take initiative, but also take direction and not just go off and do what they think is needed, but be willing to be guided, and then do a good job, a demonstrably good job at what they're asked to do. With those interns, we always ended up giving them more and more responsibility. And the interns that were slow to step up and ask for things, our interns in the U.S. mission pretty much constantly had to be coming around and saying, is there something you want me to do? Because otherwise we would tend to just do what needed to be done and kind of, to a certain extent, forget about the intern and that they needed an assignment. But those interns who took initiative and came and said, every other morning, is there something you want me to do? Is there a meeting I can cover for you? Is there something I can do to be helpful? They ended up being the interns that we would rely upon, and then we would give them more and more work. As they showed that they could do the work well, we gave them more and more responsibility. There were interns that I would send into negotiations and say, here are the US positions, go and negotiate with Egypt and Russia and see how far you can get with that. But those were only the interns that showed that they wanted to take the initiative. So in my experience, a raring to go intern is better than one who sits back and waits for you to come to him or her and say, please do this.
So it's a two-pronged process. Take initiative and do a pretty damn good job every time, right?
Yes, if you don't do a damn good job, then we end up—
Then you're out, right? And Rogel?
First, I'd like to advise them about their mindsets. people need to know, especially young ones, they need to know their mindsets in terms of looking for opportunities. One, they have to identify the differences between a job mindset, a career mindset, and a purpose mindset. Um, if only to get a job, they could just, as I had mentioned in the previous sessions, you could just look for a McDonald's work. You could do anything that would, do menial work that would provide you that kind of money that you like, right? So the higher you go up in terms of your need for money, the better for you. That's the job. Pretty much equated to the kind of um, financial resources that you're aiming at. There's also what you call the career mindset. The career mindset is pretty much focusing on the specific career or a specific job that you want to enhance in a long term, that at the end of the day, it became your career. So it's a long stretching of a particular job, making sure that this becomes your one bread and butter as part of your job mindset, but that likewise you learn to love it and you pretty much acquire the passion to enhance that, and it becomes your career, your lifelong career. But at the end of the day, you could also look at your purpose mindset, where you will not consider the money part, you will not consider a career based on the society's design, but it's a purpose where it's a mindset where you would want to do it simply because you only given one lifetime to do it, and that's your purpose, and that would give you the meaning of what life is all about. So once you have that mindset, to me that is the takeoff. Secondly, we have the children or the young people need to be informed about UN is about two facets. There are two phases in the UN. One is about idealism, and the other one is realism. They need to understand that what they look, how they perceive the UN, perhaps could be in the plane of idealism. Because the very moment they get in, it totally will change it into realistic scenario. And therefore, they have to be prepared. They have to be ready. And this is where education would kick in. Because the very moment they explore the UN, they need to understand that they cannot be immediately a specialist. As much as possible as an intern, they need to look themselves as a generalist. And Laurie had already mentioned, it's like absorb everything. It's like anything that would give you opportunity to be part of a team, go ahead, do it, and have the initiative to do something that would be of value addition to what the entire team is doing. And so I am looking at different career opportunities for the people who are, graduating this year or in the next year or so. There are several strategies in looking at the UN. One is internship. The internship path is straightforward. All you have to do is there's like 50 plus UN agencies all across the globe, right? And so you could apply directly to them in terms of their internship requirement. In the UN, they call it terms of reference. In the private sector, they call it job description. And so in the internship path, almost on a regular basis, all agencies post this internship requirement. So all they have to do is to visit a particular agency that matter to them. Like, for example, if they are into children mandate, like they could look at UNICEF. If they are into health, they could go to WHO. If they are into atomic or nuclear, they could go to IAEA. And so forth and so on. So those are the things they could look at in terms of internship path. There's also what you call the junior professional officers path, the JPO path. The JPO is provided to donor countries, citizens. So for example, the United States, the Nordic countries, the West Europe, Germany, Japan, New Zealand, and Australia, all of this actually provide a very generous, not very, but generous JPO path for their citizens. So if you are a US citizen and you're looking at the opportunity to work as JPO, then go for it. Because at the end of the day, once you're done with the training of JPO, you could be offered a more permanent work at the UN at the P2 level. So that itself is a good thing. Another path that you could explore other than internship is volunteering. So the UNV, the United Nations Volunteer Agency, which is based in Copenhagen in Germany. Am I right, Laurie? I forgot the base now.
I think
Uh,
UNV is in Vienna.
is it?
I
It's
think it's in Vienna. I'm not 100% sure, but I think.
yeah. So I think they moved into Germany right now because in Vienna it's the UNDG, UN the drug, the
Right,
drug office,
right. The Office of Drugs and ODC, the
the
Office
ODC,
of Drugs and
right,
Control.
and the IAEA, right?
Mhm.
So the volunteering is also another path that all the young people can look at, and then of course the mentoring. The mentorship is something that you could pretty much reach out to UN professionals, directors, assistant directors, and applying as a direct mentee, so that in the end you could also have the same, almost similar exposure to internship and volunteering. So those are the things that I can advise them.
And so in terms of, again, taking initiative for students, it's important to reach out and find your mentors. It's important to find out where
Yeah.
the internships are posted and follow through. I also have a quick note here that a lot of the UN internships are regularly posted on LinkedIn. So that's definitely another resource, along with obviously going directly to the websites.
Right.
And both of you have mentioned a little bit about preparation, lifelong learning, but if we could scale it back a little bit to what kind of, and this is a pretty broad question, but in terms of degrees and areas of focus, what are areas students might want to either directly study or learn for themselves right now so that they can be more competitive for internships and jobs? What are the fields or areas that they should be studying in this context?
So Rogel gave you an overview of the sorts of internships and entry-level positions that might be available at the UN itself. I want to point out that UN jobs, including internships, are not just on the UN website, un.org, but there are other UN agencies that are affiliated with the UN but have their own websites. UNDP, the UN Development Program, has a website, undp.org, where it lists job openings in UNDP, in UN Women, and in a number of other funds and programs, what they call funds and programs. UNICEF has its own website where it advertises its internships and job openings, and that's unicef.org. So if you look on the UN website, don't restrict yourself only to that, but look at some of the others as well. All three of those, UNDP, UNICEF, and the UN, have positions here in the US as well as overseas. I came in to my career through the US government, and the US government has a lot of internships. I worked for the US Department of State. The Department of State has a worldwide internship program. You can apply for internships in the State Department in Washington. You can apply for internships at the US Mission to the UN in New York, and you can apply for an internship at any of the 190 some embassies and consulates around the world. One word of caution is that you mustn't wait until a month or two before you want to have the internship. You have to apply at least 8 or 9 months in advance. So for instance, to have an internship this coming fall, you would have had to have put in your application in March. So there's a very long lag time. So if you think that you might want to work in a US embassy or at the US Mission to the UN or at the State Department, think months ahead of time. And it's a computerized online application. You have to fill out a lot of questions. You have to write an essay. Why do I want to do this? And you get the opportunity to, in rank order, list 3 or 4 places where you might want to be posted. So if you wanted to go to Paris or to Senegal or to New York, you could put all 3 down on one application, and they would then vet that application to see if they wanted to take you as an intern. There are other internship programs that are more uh, bureaucratized. There's a thing called the presidential management intern, where they take people graduating from college or grad school and put them in a series of different UN agencies to get a little taste of different agencies. And then at the end of that, the person can decide where they want to apply for an entry level position. Um, Internships are great. Internships help you to decide whether you really do like doing what you're doing or whether it really doesn't seem to be what you thought it would be. And you can rule out some possibilities by doing an internship rather than finishing your degree in a certain subject and then getting a job and 3 years in deciding, oh, I didn't really like being an engineer. Now I need to go back to school and learn to be something else. Doing a summer internship or an internship during a semester is a very good way to figure out what you want to do. But your actual question was, what subjects should you study? So in order to get a job at the Department of State, it's not 100% necessary that you study these things, but it's helpful if you study history, if you study political science, if you study international relations. It's not unusual to have someone who was an English literature major or a French major or a Russian major or a Chinese major. Far less likely that it's somebody who has some kind of science background, because it tends to be less of a scientifically oriented organization. People with an economics degree can get a job doing economic analysis and reporting, but there's no one required set of degrees that you have to have in order to get into the US Department of State. It's not like in France, where everybody going into their diplomatic corps went to Sciences Po or a particular centralized kind of university that is the feeder school into their diplomatic corps. It's really pretty wide open. You can go to pretty much any school. You can study almost anything. You have to, though, take a very competitive exam, both an oral exam and a written, well, first a written exam, then an oral exam to get into the diplomatic corps or even into the civil service. At the Department of State, you have to take an exam for that as well.
So a couple of things. One is there are a lot of opportunities in terms of internships. There are also opportunities through other areas like the diplomatic corps, coming through the state government. And Rogel, a quick question for you. Would you talk us a little bit about the NGOs that are affiliated with the UN?
Yeah. So NGO and IGO are pretty much the peripheral entities that could eventually lead all the interns into the core of the UN. So we are advising those who cannot make it immediately to the UN core to explore NGOs and IGOs, both at the local, regional, and sub-regional levels. What they do actually is it almost parallel the requirements in terms of internship with the UN. The kind of competency, the sets of skills needed, and so forth and so on. But it's pointed to the mandate of a particular NGO. And so in regards to the NGO, unlike the UN, where, as Laurie had pointed out, where education is not really a necessity unless otherwise you are a policy researcher or a policy specialist. The entry point for the UN actually does not always require a degree that is directly linked to the terms of reference. And so if you are exposing yourself into doing an internship with NGO, the NGO has a different way of doing it because they are not mandated to remove the discriminatory line of you must be a graduate of this, a graduate of that, which you won't see in the UN advertisement. So NGO is more customized to the mandate of their own entity. But in terms of the kind and quality of work is parallel to what the UN does in its entirety. So I would suggest actually for all the interns, if you are aiming to be an intern, you have to understand the organizational structure of the UN, the entire UN landscape, where you will have to look at also the sub-regional, regional headquarters. The UN has the headquarters in New York, but only if you know that there's also Geneva, there's also Vienna, there's also Nairobi, and so forth and so on. Those are the things that you have to understand as well. And then the specialized agencies, funds, and programs, you are talking about, at least under the CEB, the Chief Executives Board, you have 31 agencies that you could look at. So if you are interested into labor, if you talk about SME, you have ILO in Geneva. If you are interested in understanding UN HIV/AIDS, you have UNAIDS in Geneva as well. If you are exploring at one point to be a lawyer, international lawyer, you could look at the ICC in Netherlands. So those are the things you could look at. But NGO is a peripheral entity, similar to the international cooperation agencies. So if you look at USAID, NORAD, SIDA, JICA, TICA, or whatnot, all of these are country-based cooperation agencies that pretty much help the United Nations in its mandate. So those are the things that you can also look at for opportunities.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
If I can just jump in and say, if people are interested in NGO internships and NGO job opportunities, a good place to look is the umbrella organization Interaction. And Interaction has a number of constituent agencies. They do a lot of humanitarian work and human rights work. And so it's easier to find the job opportunities if you go to their website and look at their sort of umbrella listing, rather than going first to Human Rights Watch and then to MSF and then to each one individual. Just kind of labor saving hint.
Mm-hmm. That's a more consolidated source of information.
Yeah.
This is a lot of information, so I'm going to shift just a little bit into the more behavioral piece. Rogel, you had mentioned mindset before. Both of you are clearly uber organized people in order to maintain these careers. You have to be. So I'm assuming, but I think it's a fair assumption. So as students are looking at this pretty complex landscape of opportunities and preparation, how would you mentor them to say, here are baby steps in how to go about doing this? Because information overload is something that's just stumps people often. And even if the intention is there, here's what you do, but how do you do it is a different question.
Mm-hmm.
So if you could break it down just for the students who are starting to look at this process, but also at our seniors who really need to be ramping it up now, organization-wise, what are steps they could take to keep all of this under control and be productive and go after their goals? Laurie, you want to take this first?
Contrary to what you said, I'm not the most well-organized person.
Whoops.
Me too, actually. So I second that.
Interesting. Okay, so that gives us students hope, right?
Very often the path to finding something is to use whatever networks you have, to ask your professors, to go to meetings or to conferences and see who you meet and see what they might have to recommend. The first internships that I got were because connections at university put me in a certain direction. So the first internship that I did was an international internship in Poland back when it was still under communist rule, because I joined an organization, a club at University of Pennsylvania that was a worldwide club and put economic students into various internships in different countries. And so I joined the club at Penn, and from that, I got an internship. My next internship was because a professor of mine in graduate school knew that I was going back to Philadelphia for summer vacation and said, oh, he had a colleague, a former graduate and an alumni who was running a think tank, and he would recommend me for an internship with that think tank. So I got a summer internship with a think tank in Philadelphia, um, very much because I happened to to put myself in the way of being told about something. Rather, of course, this is the era before internet, so I wasn't just blindly looking at the internet, but through personal connections, I found things, and very often, still, that can be useful. And now, I guess, kind of to supplement personal connections is LinkedIn. That maybe you know somebody who knows somebody. Alumni can be helpful also.
And Rogel, mute.
Okay. Um, I think I totally agree with Laurie. Networking is very critical nowadays. You cannot not network. You need to network, and part of that is it will open up the floodgate of opportunities for you. But opportunities also require something in return. Though you have the opportunity to network, opportunity to be to market yourself, if you're not marketable, it's nonsense to network. So what I'd like to point out here actually is you need to ensure that all opportunities that come your way in developing yourself personally and professionally, grab it. Um, you need to understand that we are in a globalized world, and therefore access to opportunities may not be in the US initially, but somewhere out there. I never thought that PhD or master's program in Germany is free for US citizens. Up until I browsed through a scar the entire internet on the opportunities on PhDs and masters. I never thought that cultural exposure to a particular country can be free. If you are, you could sell that you have something to offer as well as a how do you call it, a barter. But what I'm saying here is you need to be prepared on so many layers. The world, especially the UN, requires multilinguist individual. And therefore, I've been emphasizing we have 6 official UN languages. And if and only if you have the opportunity to at least, in given 24 hours of your time, invest something into learning one language in a particular period of 3 years. So if you have 30 years down the road, in 3 years for each language, you will master multiple languages. All you have to do is to meet. You need to acquire knowledge, whether it's formal or informal, do it. You have heard perhaps of lynda.com, in which it provides you a vast network of training programs that could certify you for free. So use that, tap that, utilize that, because that at the end of the day will give you, will equip you pretty much. And so on top of networking, partnership, and whatnot, alongside with that is build your capacity. Intellectually and personally, you need to improve yourself. Do not stop from learning, because the world changed so fast that at the end of the day, if you don't have the right knowledge, you'll be going nowhere. And so right for now, I think a big chunk of the UN staff are about to retire, and this will be replenished by new manpower. And this new manpower will have to be extremely, extremely excellent in IT. And so all these people are about to retire will be dependent on new interns, the interns who have this capacity to pretty much help them or complement them. So look at the profile now of these people, so that at the end of the day, you know what you will offer as value addition to this coming new set of manpower.
So a lot of focus on learning the landscape, learning what people are doing, and the ones who are retiring, they will be replaced by younger generations. So again, that thirst for knowledge is a theme I'm hearing over and over again, that we need to be focused on learning, the growth mindset, and also technological facility. We are going to very soon open it up to Q&A from students as well. We will moderate the questions, and both of you have answered this in different ways, but as we in this part of the conversation, if you could give one single piece of advice to college students about succeeding in UN careers, what would it be? Laurie.
I guess don't limit yourself to what you're already familiar with, but try to stretch yourself and be open to new challenges and to doing things that might be beyond what you feel comfortable with.
So be brave, be courageous, explore.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. And Rogel.
I think preparation. You need to prepare in all fronts. When you're looking at UN careers, there's vast entry points. You have the policy, you have the program, you have the operations, you have humanitarian, you have the peacekeeping. All of this are just waiting for you to explore. And so my thing is you need to prepare. So if you are looking at policy as a career, then you need to equip yourself with so many things about what policy is all about, the statistics, the demographics, and whatnot. If you're looking at operations, are you going to budget? Are you going to finance? Are you going to HR, procurement, travel, and whatnot? You need to be prepared in all steps that you will do. So that in the end, you're not wasting resources, you're not wasting time, you're not wasting your effort. All of this will have to be zeroed in on what you want to accomplish at the end of the day. If the UN is really the thing that you want to explore and be part of, then concentrate, pretty much elaborate on how you will improve yourself from here on onwards.
So those are two streams of thought that kind of merge. On the cognitive intellectual side, it is prepare, learn, keep growing. And on the emotional side is have the mindset and the courage to keep growing. So to take the risks, and so they come in, they're back to back, that emotionally and cognitively we say, we're going to keep taking risks and we're going to keep learning.
Correct.
Good. We are going to be opening up questions to students. So if you have questions, please type it in the chat box and Ashley and I will bring them forward. And while we are waiting, this is a question I tend to ask most people I talk with. Looking back on your careers, was there one thing that you wish you had known then that you learned over time that would have helped your productivity? What was one thing that you wished you had been told or known in your earlier stages of career that you would tell students? Rogel?
Well, if I think of that, that would now fall into regret.
Okay.
And I hate that. Because every single step that I do, it's not oftentimes strategic. You know, it's like, I always believe in strategy. I always believe in the strategic way of doing things, but I also don't want to lose spontaneity. And at times, in experiencing spontaneity, that's where you experience failure, and that failure help you at the end of the day. So there's no learning or insight that I would want to have had I had known, and would have made me a better professional. Because if I do that, it would be unfair to these young people, you know, because they might not have that resource. They might not have that opportunity or access to opportunity. They might not have that experience to guide them through. So to me, what I'm really looking at really is for them to be aware of what particular knowledge, skill, or whatnot they still need to improve on, so that in the end they know the gap where to improve on. They know the gap to tighten, how to tighten it, so that in the end they could bridge it and be part of their vision. So my take really is they need to commit to this vision. They need to stop doing Facebook. If they could spend too much time in Facebook, calculate it so that in the end, at the end of the day, they could also parallel that in their time investment to something more productive. That is what I will, So again, the millennials' attitude in terms of learning is totally different from what I have learned, from what I had experienced in life, and sadly, it takes some time before they acquire it. So I will always go back to just be prepared, knowing that you know what you want in the future. So I will always go back to that.
So you have the vision, now find the mentors and put in the hard work.
Right.
And Laurie, not as a regret, but just as a experience, what are things you wish you had perhaps known?
So one thing that it took me a while to catch on to was the importance of what sometimes is called managing up. Figuring out what it is that your boss wants to hear, wants to see, and packaging what you're doing in such a way that it's getting the attention of your boss and getting the buy-in of your boss, and being more aware of the importance of office politics and to a certain extent self-promotion. This is not something that sort of came intrinsically easily to me, but as I went on and saw how colleagues were interacting, I became more aware of the importance of office politics, self-promotion, managing up, and always being aware of how to keep the boss happy rather than just doing a good job at your working level.
So do a good job and then talk about it.
Yeah.
Rogel, we have a question from a student. Why did you transition out of the field of behavioral and organizational psychology?
It's not by intent that I left the work. In fact, up until now, I still do organizational behavioral psychology that had helped me directly or indirectly. Like, for example, in the UN, I've been telling everyone this. In the UN, you have to stroke a lot of egos, a lot of, bloated egos. And as someone who has a background in behavioral psychology, that had helped me actually survive in that kind of environment. Not necessarily I always say yes, but it's something that the discipline had given me the courage to be straightforward without really offending, being realistic without really forcing something. All this ambassadorial work is pretty stressful for them. And to me, my background as a psychologist had helped me to support them in terms of their needs. So I did not leave the organizational and behavioral psychology discipline. In fact, it had helped me build up on things. So I am surrounded with so much behavioral psychology in my previous, past, and present work. So if the question is about why I leave organizational psychology because of HR, yes, the functional HR I left because I see that there's much larger area that I could pretty much explore and optimize my skills.
And this brings us to the point we talk about a lot with students in career development is transferable skills. The idea that no matter what the skill is, the application can be in so many more spaces that we can even begin imagining.
And likewise, that also had given me the thinking that I should not be a specialist. I would rather be a generalist where I could do so many things. So being a generalist is also an advantage somehow, especially if you work for the UN, because you can explore a lot of careers, as I had mentioned earlier.
This is a question, Laurie, you had touched on it briefly earlier, but what is the scope for STEM majors working at the UN?
Okay, so a lot of what the UN does is writing reports on things going on around the world, and a lot of those reports contain a great deal of statistics. And so if a STEM major knows how to do statistical analysis and how to gather statistics and interpret statistics, they can be helpful, especially in some of the funds and programs, UNDP, UN Women, others that do a lot of surveys and statistical reports on the state of the world's women or the state of the world's children. And they do a lot of statistical work. So that's one aspect of STEM. Also, in the US government as well as in the UN, there's an enormous need for IT specialists. Everyone uses computers now, and probably not as much in the UN, but in the US government, there's a whole separate computer system that's classified and how to do the encryption. And de-encryption is very important, how to make sure that all of the communication systems, information technology is working properly, very important. So there's a big demand for IT majors and also statistical kinds of people. Then different branches of science have different places where they could fit into the UN. As Rogel was saying, there's the World Health Organization, the WHO, in Geneva. They've got doctors, they've got scientists, they've got researchers, they've got nurses, all sorts of people who do medical sorts of research. There's the International IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, where they use scientists who've studied nuclear sorts of things. There's in the peacekeeping realm, there are doctors and nurses and social mental health advisors, all sorts of people who might know something in the STEM field. So there are opportunities for STEM majors. They're not perhaps quite as easily identifiable as being a political science generalist, but if you go on the websites and look at the job descriptions, you'll probably find that there are opportunities.
If I may add, for the IT people, there's also the ITC and ITU in Geneva. So those are the ones that take care very much of the telecommunication and all the requirements of IT in the UN field. ITC and ITU.
So we have a couple more minutes. So I'm gonna wrap up and then Ashley can finish up. The last thing, because things are stressful at the moment and things often are when you're young and starting a career, what's a message you would give to the students in terms of why you keep working in this field and why they should keep feeling encouraged to work even if it's challenging? So inspirational words, first from Rogel and then from Laurie.
One thing that had given me real deep reflection is the quarantining and the lockdown. A week ago, my mother-in-law died. Yesterday, another relative died. And the death in itself is a jolting force that tells me that life moves on despite. And it is encouraging in a way that I still have life to share. And I think in terms of service, that's the main reason why I'm still here. The main reason why I still believe in the United Nations is because there's billions of people needing help, needing support, needing warm bodies just to be there and to listen. In the peacekeeping mission, in the Human Rights Office of the Commissioner, there's a lot of what you call counselors that pretty much add up to the mission of the UN. They just need to be there to listen to the people who would suffer or suffering. Because by mere listening, you are already sharing a big part of you. By mere being there, you are already part of their existence. So why am I still here? Why am I still believe that there's so much to share, there's so much to do, it's because of that. Because the very moment I pass away, we don't know, in the next 4 days or so, I'm gone. But I believe that the commitment to be with the community, the bigger community, is what matters at the end of the day. And I think that is the premise of the United Nations, that we are in a big international family, that everyone counts. Every one single person, warm body counts. We need not be intellectual. We need not be highly philosophical, but we just need warm body who will always be there to listen to us, whether via Zoom, via Skype, or whatnot. Because going back to the competitive listening, that's all that matters now. That someone somewhere out there is listening. And with the passing of my mother-in-law and another relative, it's tough, but we have to move on. Life moves on, as they said, and that gives me the energy to always be on top of things. Because the very moment I lose it, and I cannot turn back the clock, as they said.
Well, very quickly, we talk a lot about witnessing and listening, and that alone validates our stories, which also can be very healing. So organizations that do this work of just being present for people and listening to their stories, we leave an imprint.
Yeah.
And imprint is huge in the long run. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
And Laurie.
Well, first of all, let me say, Rogel, let me express my deep condolences for your loss.
Thanks, Laurie. Thank you. Thank you, Maya. Thank you.
And very much along the same lines as what Rogel said, the whole time I was working at the UN, with the UN, I was very conscious of wanting to make the world a better place and to try to help formulate policy guidelines, because that's what UN resolutions do. They give policy guidelines to governments on what they could be doing to make the world a better place, and policy guidelines to non-governmental organizations, philanthropic organizations, and private sector organizations on how they can help improve the world, make it a better place. And so to try to work with others to come up with those ideas of how to improve the lot of your average person, as is so much the watchword in the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. There's an attempt to leave no one behind, to lift everyone up in terms of their standard of living, and to not leave anyone behind, to make the world better for everyone. And I was very conscious of trying to work to improve those policy guidelines so that people around the world, in the US, in other countries, could have better lives. And my husband used to joke every night I would come home from work, he'd say, "So, did you make the world a better place today?" And that was very much a motivation for doing this kind of international work.
Absolutely.
You could say yes, right? So, and that's huge.
Sometimes yes, sometimes I just move papers from one side of the desk to the other. Sometimes we move the ball forward.
Yeah. So I do want to thank Rogel and Laurie. Thank you very much. I'm going to hand it over to Ashley. And students, if you have questions, please email either Ashley or myself, and we will make sure it gets to Laurie and Rogel. And keep fighting, keep your spirits up. I heard this recently in another talk. Do not take your foot off the gas pedal. Just because things are tough, things are going to shift, and then careers are going to start just growing.
Yeah.
And thank you, students, also for your participation. And in Indian style, namaste. And
thanks,
Ashley, over to you.
Yes, thank you everyone for your support and participation. Everyone, Laurie, Rogel, Maya, everyone hit such important points today, and I hope this event was very beneficial for everyone. And again, this event is being recorded, so it will be shared with everyone. So if you know, oh, I missed a certain point, you'll have the opportunity to go back and be able to, you know, listen to the questions and everything. So again, thank you for everyone for all your support, and definitely hang in there. Again, we will move through this. We will get through this. And with the UN's help as well and support, hopefully we're able to move past this in a quicker motion.
Yeah. Thanks,
And there will be
Ashley.
work to be done. So
Yeah, a lot of work to be done and everything.
Yep.
So,
Yep.
and again, any questions, students, you may have that you didn't have the opportunity. Laurie and Rogel are both professors at FDU. They teach for core, global issues, as well as cross-cultural perspectives. So any questions you may have, please feel free to either reach out to myself or Maya, and we will be sure to get those questions over to Laurie and Rogel. So again, just a reminder, if you were here for attendance for class, please be sure to list your name, the course you're here for, and your professor, so you do get credit. And other than that, I hope everybody else has a healthy and safe day, and we hope to see you again all soon.
Thank you. Have a good one, Ashley.
Bye,
thank
everyone.
you.
Bye.
Thank you.